I'm here to demo Blender, and I'm going to show once again the hand rigs that we used in Blender for the movie Elephant's Dream. Here's a shot from the movie, which has a little bit of character animation going on in it. I've isolated the character on its own so we can see it play back at a reasonable rate, and the facial animation, and it's also got a little hand animation where the hands are moving around in a fairly flexible fashion. The fingers are curling, the palm is moving around and compressing, the flesh is moving around naturalistically. The rig that allows that to happen is surprisingly easy for the animator to use. There are very few bones that are used to control the motion of the hand in these rigs. So you can see that the fingers can flex and bend, and that the palms also have a large degree of flexibility that gives you that nice kind of fleshy look as they're bending around back and forward. But the actual number of bones needed to do that is pretty limited. So it's not this limited. So is this the right way? Yeah. So this is the hand. Obviously that's not all I'm using to move the fingers around. All I can do is rotate the hand around. But if you go to a separate layer in the armature, you can see the bones that control the fingers and the palm and the thumb. And so you just have a look at that, moving around. Right there. And so, if you look at these bones, there's basically one long bone in each finger, and each bone controls the overall rotation of that finger. It's constrained to work in two axes, but you notice that doesn't change the amount of roll that the finger has. To control the compression of the finger, you simply scale that bone, and the finger, if you scale that bone, the finger will sort of roll around. So you can scale it, rotate it, scale it, rotate it. If you scale it up, it sort of flexes the finger a little bit more than straight or in the other direction, as if the finger had been pressing around a hard surface, so you can animate that kind of a gesture too. The hand has 3 bones that allow you to move the palm around. One is at the base of the thumb, and it gives you this kind of flexibility. And the other 2 are at the extreme edges behind the little finger and the pointer, and they give you that flex in the palm that you really need to kind of have an expressive, naturally moving hand. I'm going to load up the library file for the model, which doesn't have any extraneous stuff. I'll go into this mode here. It doesn't have any extraneous stuff to kind of distract us, and we can look at how that rig is created. So, go library files, emo to blend, and here's our emo rig. The first thing that's of interest is that you don't see the hand bones right away when you have the model visible, and that's because the armature is separated into different layers. It has an internal layering system that allows animators to concentrate on whatever pass or part of the body they're animating at the time. So when they're animating the face, they only see the bones that are on the face. If they open up an action editor, they only see the keys that are animating the face. They don't see hand animation at the same time. If they want to, they can select the hand layer and open it, and they can have multiple layers visible or hidden. So you can click on a layer to hide it or unhide it. You can click on this layer, for instance, here I'm going on the wrong tab. Always do that. Here I'm going between the, let's move this back to where it belongs. Okay, here I'm going between the facial animation and overall body animation, and I can do both at the same time if I want to. I'm going to look at the hands, which are over here and over here. So we have two hand layers for the left and right hand, and they're both the same, except they control different hands. Once again, we've got the same setup. We've got the bones constrained to control the rotation of the palm, rotation of the base of the thumb, rotation of the thumb, and the curl of the thumb, hand curl, finger curl, and finger rotation. The reason that it's set up in this way with rotations rather than having a target at the tip of the finger, well, first of all, let me say that you could control each bone and each joint of the finger separately, but that would be pretty tedious to animate. You'd get a lot of flexibility. You could animate your fingers in a zigzag pattern if you wanted to, but the downside of that is that if you wanted to have natural motion, you would have to be very careful that you move the bone in the right way, and you're unlikely to want to do zigzags with the fingers. So that's kind of locked away by using an IK constraint. A normal IK constraint would give you a target bone, which I'll show you in a minute. Okay, so here's a little target bone that you can use to do normal IK. Now let me I just want to do one thing to this bone. I want to free it so I can move it around. So you can have a kind of animation where you move this tip and the finger moves around with it. The problem with that is that you can still do whacked out things with the finger with this bone. You can really be whacked out. And if you have in fact 5 if you count the thumb, 5 little identical bones floating around the tips of your fingers, and your hands zoomed out a little bit and it's in a funny position, it's really hard to select the right one, and then once you've selected it, it's really hard to figure out what the right direction is to move it to do what you want. You kind of force yourself to have to align your view with where the finger has to go, and that's not a very natural way of working. So I've created this bone that stretches from the base of the finger to its tip. And you'll notice that the individual finger bones in the chain are not quite aligned with that. They form an arc above it. And that bone is apparent to this little target. So instead of moving the target directly, I can use this parent bone to rotate the target around, and if I scale it, I bring the target in and out. So now I've automatically constrained my target to move only the ways I want it to move, just by giving a parent and using rotation and scale on the parent instead. I've got another little target floating above, and what that does is this bone tries its best to point towards that one with an IK constraint, and the result is that the finger stays in a plane. And so as you bend the finger around, it doesn't twist. It stays in one plane, moving back and forth. And all these bones, these little green bones in the middle, are just blend bones that have half the rotation of the section of the finger, and they allow the knuckle to deform in a natural way and not lose volume as the finger is compressing. Now, I only need to control this bone, so the only bones that are visible in the normal armature is this bone, because that's all the animator needs to see. And now you have a very simple way of looking at the hand. You can make it even simpler if you turn off, in the view properties, if you turn off relationship lines, because you don't need to see them, and then you have a very simple clean view, and you can see the hand very clearly, and you can also see which bone is supposed to affect which finger. You can select multiple bones, roll them, and scale them, and you can make a fist really fast that way. Then you take one of them, and straighten it out, and make kind of a pointing hand. If you want to make the hand look like it's pressing against the surface, you can scale this bone up, and because of the fact that the arc of the individual digit bones in the finger don't line up with that straight line, when you scale it up, it makes them line up, and thus pushes the finger into an inverse curl, as if you're pressing against the surface. When you're creating your rig, the more arched you make those bones, the more reverse flex you allow in the finger, so you can control that at rigging time rather than at animation time. So that's the setup for the finger. The setup for these bones is simple too. I could of course have given control of each bone in the hand to the animator, but I simply chose to blend the influence of the motion of these two bones among the ones in the middle. and I hid the middle ones, giving the animate only 2 bones that are still sufficient to control enough of the flex and shape of the hand. So you can have it pointing, and you can have like this kind of little finger kind of curling down a little bit as it points, and you can get kind of a nice natural fleshy feel to the hand as the fingers are moving around. The other aspect of the hand rig that I can show here, in clear size and rotation, Alt S and Alt R, for instance, to return to the rest position, is that the hand is rigged by the bones, by very few bones actually. There's not a lot of bones that are being used to correct the shape of the flesh as the bones are deforming them. And the hand is rigged via bones, but it's also using blends to blend shapes to allow the flesh to have a natural look as the fingers are flexing. So if I can demonstrate that here by selecting these bones and rotating them, and you can see how it sort of pushes the flesh of the hand back. Well, it's not doing any kind of physics or simulation type tricks, and there aren't any hidden chains there that are pushing the flesh back. What I'm using is shapes. The hand, let's add a header here, and make that an IPO view. And let's look at the shapes that are available for the hand. You'll notice there's quite a big number of shapes that is on each hand. So this is like all the different correction shapes in the email model on one hand. And they each fix the shape of the flesh for the extreme position of the bone that is controlling that joint. And for instance, you have the rest position of the hand. If you click on it, you can see the mess-ups that happen. I'll lock that and put the hand into an even more extreme position so you can just see how bad it looks without any shapes. So you can see that the hand is sort of self-intersecting and the joints don't look very good, etc., etc. But if I unlock that, even in extreme position, it looks pretty okay. In fact, when it's subsurfed, it looks really nice. So a kind of fun thing to do is look at what those shapes look like when the hand is laid out flat. Those correction shapes for the flat hand look rather extreme. Sorry, this is the left hand, so bulge. So this is the correction shape that fixes the bulge on the pointer finger when the pointer finger is going up. It's using a vertex group, LW point base. Here we go. It's using this vertex group here to define its influence. So what I did was I built the shapes for all the fingers rolling up at the same time, and then I painted some vertex groups here to limit them for each finger. If I take that vertex group away, you can see the shape that I made. Bang. And it's pretty darn ugly looking when the hand is collapsed. And of course, when I modeled that shape, I didn't have the hand collapsed like that. Let me lock the mesh. Okay. Of course, I modeled that shape in this position to look natural. And then I used the driver to make it look natural at every angle and not just at the extreme angle. Let me go back to this one. Let me see what the vertex group is called. And let me re-add it. Here we go. So I re-added it, so it just influenced that finger. So how do you do the drivers so that the shapes are applied at the right rotations? Well, you can imagine that this driver is a curve, and indeed it is, and it's in the IPO curve editor. You can see the curve right here. So it goes from 0 to 1, from no application of the shape to a full application of the shape. And if I open the transform properties, you can add a driver in the transform properties of the IPO curve, where you can drive any curve in Blender with the transform of any object or any bone in your scene. And so I simply added a driver and I told it that I wanted to look at the skeleton object, and that I want to look at the first joint of the finger, fin point 1, and I wanted to look at Z rotation, because that's the rotation axis that's pushing the finger back, up like that. And so I simply mapped it, so when the Z rotation is at default, there's no shape applied, and when the Z rotation is at maximum, you get the full shape applied, and therefore you get a nice smooth blend. There's a bit of a curve that I adjusted to it, which I basically tweaked by looking at the finger as it moved, and then just tweaking that curve. And you can actually copy that curve and driver over to the other fingers, and then just change the target bone name. So you can add the iPro drivers pretty fast once you know what you're doing. I'd say it took about 2 or 3 days to do all the correction shapes for the hands. It's pretty hard to model the shapes in when the hand's at this extreme deformation, because the space that you're moving the point in isn't the original rest position space of the mesh, it's the deformed space. And Blender tries to correct for that and make it work really smoothly, and that works pretty well for, I'd say, 90% of the vertices that you're moving around. The other caveat is that you can only move one point at a time for that to work properly, and there are some points that are being deformed by so many bones that the reverse transform doesn't work right, and you have to kind of slowly and carefully nudge those points into position. So it takes quite a while to do those blend shapes. And once you've done it, that's built into the rig, and you never have to worry about it again. So it's, you know, a short period of time of work to get it set up, and then it's something you can forget about, and it makes a nice moving pan for the rig. I'll unlock this now, and now you can see the effect of that. And so you have those shapes are in effect for almost every single joint transformation that's going on in the hands. And that's basically the basics of the hand setup in the Blender rigs in L3.